Good morning, and thank you for all coming back. It's always a good sign at a conference. People haven't sort of run away and just grabbed the biscuits or the head of the pineapple and run out the building. So I'm Roy. I look after the education programme at BNF, and as Nicola said, when I had a real job, I was a food technology home economics teacher. So I was actually in a school earlier this week, and I was reminiscing with one of the teachers there about I've still got my O-level cookery book at home, which I should have really handed in, but I didn't, and I kind of feel bad about it, but I don't, because it's such a good book. I love it. So I'm going to resurrect O-level cookery, I've decided. Anyway, so I'm going to be looking at this topic, and it's quite a huge topic. And in fact, earlier this week, the foundation actually had a whole day sort of forum looking at sustainability, food, nutrition and health. And there are no easy answers, but there's lots and lots of questions. So really, this is an opportunity in the next 30 minutes really to go over some of the issues, to make reference to some of the reports that are coming out, and really it's about taking that information back and talking to the young people that you're engaged with about some of these issues and what they think, and looking for sources of information. And I'm also then going to reference some of the resources that we're developing at the foundation, and also in partnership with Nicola at Meat and Education, that hopefully will help you in the classroom as well. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. So there won't be, and the answer is X, because that would be absolutely impossible. So we'll do our very, very best for you. So if we just take what we hear about sustainability, obviously related to food, I'm not going to do about cars and light bulbs and things at the moment. There is a number of different types of food which are often under the spotlight to say, oh, we could be more sustainable if we ate less fish, or, because there's no fish in the ocean, if we reduced the amount of meat we did radically, if we didn't have any milk or milk products from cows because they're out in the fields doing some things which I'm sure your students could describe in more colourful ways than I could, because this is being recorded, and lots of things being imported as well. So there's lots of things under the spotlight, but also looking at excessive food packaging. And often we think there's far too much food packaging, but some of the research is showing actually there's a good lot of work being done on it, and in fact it's not the packaging we should worry about, it's actually the food in the packaging that's our biggest concern. And that then links obviously into food waste as well. So it's actually really complicated. And as I say, this meeting we went to earlier in the week, there were different academics and people working in the food industry. And it's so absolutely massive. I mean, we had somebody there from Unilever, a massive, huge company, and they've got some absolutely amazing targets that they want to reach. But to them, it's one little step at a time for each of their products, and they make Marmite, they make pepperoni, they do Persil, they do loads of different types of products. But for them, it's to look at each product and how they can make small environmental, health and sustainable changes to each of their products. So globally, that has a bigger impact. So we can all we're all in it together. I feel a bit like David Cameron, but that's the general gist of it. You deliberately cannot read this slide, but these are just some of the things from a report which was from the Government Office for Science, and it was just looking at some of the challenges and some of the research drivers, which is about the pressures of food production, and also what the tensions and trade-offs are, because obviously all of our decisions that we make in life have consequences, and that's one of the things we talk about kids in D&T or home economics or domestic science, and there are always going to be consequences of what we decide to do. And I just wanted to highlight sort of three of them particularly, and because I was obviously here today on the meat front, and the one about the livestock with the being a big source of greenhouse emissions, tensions and trade-offs. Well, the arable land couldn't be used for anything else. Actually, when the animals are on the land, they lock in the carbon as well compared to arable crops. And already efficiencies have been achieved with diet change and so forth. So they're already working towards those sorts of things. Another one might be lower red meat consumption. However, if we just say don't eat red meat, what do you replace it with? And how are you going to ensure that the population is actually having a good, healthy, balanced diet, getting the optimal sort of amount of nutrients in their diet, particularly when we look at the micronutrients, and we're going to come to that in much more depth in a moment. And another one, which I thought was interesting, about the excessive packaging. And that's here saying, actually, it's the food in the packaging that's a bigger concern than sometimes the packaging itself. So it's something just to think about all the time, that sometimes it's actually about producing the food, how it's produced, it's left in the field, the production of that food, and actually wastage at home as well as in the supermarket or store, but also at home. So that it's not just as simple as we might think. Here's another report, which is worth having a look at, particularly if you can't get to sleep at night. But it's a really good one, and there's some really good sort of summaries within that. And here are just 5 of the sort of the key ones that I pulled out, really. So it's really about that future, food supply and making sure it's affordable, because we have got globally, a bigger population about to come on our planet. Okay, so how do we do that? What are going to be the trade-offs and tensions? Okay, that's really key. The other one as well, about the stability of that food supply as well. Global access, so the security for everybody, that's obviously important. The food system, so we don't actually affect the climate. And then also it's the knock-on effect. It's not just producing the food, but how about all the other sort of the biodiversity in our countryside and our farms, and locally or nationally or internationally? How does those changes that we make to producing food affect butterflies and bees and rabbits and all sorts of other species as well that rely on what we're doing over hundreds and hundreds of years? So there's actually lots and lots of things, and there's a huge long list here of then sort of priorities for action, and you could go through quite a lot of them. But my key one, being in education, and I'm sure hopefully you would share this, is I actually quite like this thing about empowering citizens. And I think it's just important that everybody, every child, knows about where their food comes from and how it's processed and produced. I think that's key. I think you then need to know, as an informed consumer as well, that you know how to store that food and prepare it safely and have the cooking skills in order to do something. So using Chris's suggestion, cutting the fat off or taking the bone out, or going to those horrendous lengths of cutting up your own iceberg lettuce. I mean, it's a challenge to us all. And then actually preparing it in a nice way that we enjoy the food, and actually we understand the nutritive value to a different level for different people, but you actually enjoy your food for your life. And that's a really key thing, because it's all about living ultimately, but it's empowering people to have that information to make those good choices. So to me, as an educator, there's lots of other things which scientists and other people will be doing, but I think it's important that everybody plays a role, particularly in educating young people. There's also lots of different quotes from this book, and there's just a few of them here. And the key one is, if we are going to have a sustainable planet, a sustainable food supply, there clearly will have to be some changes to our diet. It's then working out how we make those changes. I mean, how long have we been looking at trying to change people's diets to be healthy diets? Are we there yet? No. So there's lots of conflicting aspects. The reason why the Foundation's interested in sustainability is clearly, we like bunny rabbits and all the rest of it, like anybody else does, but we're interested obviously in the nutritional impact, and often this isn't picked up quite a lot. And so we think, well, what is a sustainable, healthy, low-impact diet? And can we achieve it? So obviously our starting place is always being, well, what is the current state of the diet? And I don't need to go through any of these stats on here for you, but it's quite clear that our diet overall is out of balance, one way or the other. So we know that there's already a nutrition issue, and if we're being asked to make changes to our diet, and I mean food and drink, and our shopping behaviour, and our tradition perhaps of eating different types of foods as a nation, so cultural aspects and religious aspects as well, what impact will those changes have on our diet if we already know our diet isn't well balanced or healthy already? It gets a bit tricky, doesn't it? And there are some more global nutrition issues as well. So we know that we've got more life expectancy, we're going to have more people, we're going to have 1 billion people overweight and 1 billion people malnourished. Seems a bit strange. 6 billion going up to 9 billion. We've got rapid development and the westernisation of different cultures as well, because they perceive that different food categories are of value and of interest to them. We have limited space. We can't create more land. I mean, I'm sure we can build it if we're in Saudi Arabia with lots of hotels and things, but you know, there's a limited, finite amount of place. And also, you know, how are we going to create this sort of healthy, low impact, and making sure people are well nourished as well. And these are just a few stats just to obviously reinforce that we've got issues with food and nutrition. I'd always go back, and I hope you would, is back to the Eat Well plate model. Because this is, as you know, the model that we should all be aiming for. But are we? And is this a sustainable model? So here's a nice little slide, which I do like, and these are some of the sort of recommendations. But what we're saying here is fruits and vegetables, are we as a population having at least 5 portions of 80 grams per day at least? No, we know this one. Oily fish, Georgine's already talked about that. No. Are we within the energy? Yes, we're fine on energy. Fat? Yes, we're fine, but it's the type of fat that's the problem. Added sugars? No, we're not reaching that recommendation. Fibre? No, we know that's a long story, we know that one. Salt? No. And then vitamins and minerals? Yes and no. So if that's what we're trying to aim for, but we already know that we're not doing it with all the foods in those already proportions, but then some people are saying perhaps we need to reduce some of those foods. How do we reduce those foods but make sure that the diet is in balance, so we're actually correcting all of these sort of targets to make sure people are on message? So it's a real huge big challenge. If we take the vitamins and minerals and going slightly further as well, here's the population. Okay, so nutrient. This is evidence that we have of low intakes, and this is below the lower reference nutrient intake. So I don't need to tell you, you know, that's at about 2% of the population, they're very low needs of different nutrients. So this is below the LRNI, okay? So it's quite worrying. So low intake and then low status. Obviously one's done with sort of blood and other things. So there's about sort of 14 nutrients there that we know as a nation, as a population, that we're not actually getting enough of. And then when we look to main food categories, where do those nutrients that we know are already low in our diet, and we have good evidence to support this, where do these nutrients come from? So we get a lot from meat, from fish, and from milk. Hang on, aren't there things we've got to eat less of? So if we eat less of them, potentially, where do we get all these other nutrients from? Because there's quite a range of different micronutrients represented here, and then we can go on, cereals and products, you know, we talked about wheat prices and other things, and potatoes and vegetables. Interesting though, isn't it, all the emphasis on eating more fruit, and there's only one nutrient that's really there compared to all the rest. Drinks, alcohol is still there, fat spreads and so forth. So it's a huge, diverse area to have a look at. So we know that we've actually got a problem with our diet. We can back that up with the evidence. And if we do make those changes in order to look at making food low impacts and sustainable, what are the trade-offs and tensions if we're already not eating a well-balanced diet as a population group already? And where does the education come from? So where your food comes from, how to prepare it, and that consumer acceptability as well, that will people actually eat it? You know, so rather than fish fingers, it might be soy fingers or whatever else happens to be. So it's quite an interesting thing as well. But I also talked about other aspects. So it's not just about sort of the growing the food and all the rest of it and the nutrition, but it's also about the food waste as well, because that's a huge area on food sustainability. So we've got some waste in field as well. So there's a report there, Feeding Britain. So that's quite a lot of stuff that's left in the field. We've got post-field there. Okay, so we lose a lot of food as we go on. So the particularly one I really liked, the thing I took from the report, was the rejections of foods on aesthetic grounds. And I decided if that's life was still on BBC One, I'd definitely send that potato in, because I just love the shape of it like a duck. But it's true, isn't it, that we did go through a phase where lots of food was rejected because it didn't look too good, where now we can buy more curly bananas and other things, and often that's through EU regulations as well. But it's knowing what you can then do. It's that food skill and understanding that if you do have, you know, a Daffy Duck potato like that, you can still prepare it. It's not, you know, it's absolutely fine. You just got to, you know, make sure that it's peeled and all the rest of it, and you can cook it. But it's understanding and having that information at your fingertips on there. There's also the food wastage, and you've probably been on the WRAP site already. But the huge waste is absolutely staggering. I'm actually, I live in London, I live in Greenwich. You may not have realised from my lovely accent, sometimes I'm an EastEnders. We have a food waste bin in my kitchen. We have to do it. It's, you get fined otherwise. And I'm staggered by sometimes the waste that I have. I've got a compost outside in the garden, but I'm still staggered about the amount of food I actually waste myself. And it's actually quite interesting to see this. So more food and drink thrown away than packaging. 8.3 million tonnes of food waste, and this is at home. So is this to do with people not knowing what to do with the food, with leftovers? Have we moved on because people were just buying food in packets and throwing stuff away? Bring back rissoles. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? What do you do with your leftovers? So it's having that good consumer education. Is the food being stored properly? Do people understand, use, buy and best before properly? It comes back to some of the good educational principles that I hope you all share here as well. And then their research is looking at why. Well, confidence and skills in food preparation. There's a huge job here for people like ourselves here. Planning. Well, I'm not the best in writing shopping lists when I go shopping, I must admit. Though I have been training myself recently. So what I now do is in my trolley, I always have piles like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But it's that pre-planning as well that is absolutely vital. It's that knowledge about food storage. I mentioned the labelling. And as well, and just actually where you put these foods. And to us, it's quite simple. But this is as a population. So we need to actually make sure that this is embedded with everybody at the moment. There's also aspects of a consumer choice, and Chris has already sort of mentioned quite a lot of this. And I thought this was interesting to put in as well, because this backs up why people pick certain different types of foods and what are the drivers. So in the future, if we're looking at aspects of sustainability or reducing some foods, what are people's triggers? And as Chris already mentioned, price is a key thing that drives people to different food products. And as you go down, it's interesting to see that the more environmental type sustainability kind of buzzwords are much lower down on generally people's lists. So at the bottom there's GM free, organic. You work your way up, environmentally friendly, ethical, animal welfare standards, and so forth. But it's interesting to me that price is always the key driver. And here's another report from Which just last year. Their top one was quality, safe, obviously that's very, very important, and then price again, and then healthy eating, and then the organic is right the way down the bottom to people's preferences too. So, in our sort of economy at the moment, trying to do low impact, price, nutrition, it's very complicated as well. But different roles to play, and of course my main thing would be about making sure that young people in school get a good basis on food education, so they really understand the basics, which I've already mentioned today. So different ways in which we can achieve this. So the first one, obviously, that we need as a nation to look at these dietary patterns to make sure that we have a healthy population. Okay. Equally, we need to make sure that we've got a planet to live on in order to have people that live on it and who are healthy. So there's going to be trade-offs and those tensions as well. So that's key. We need to try and produce more with the same or less because we've got more people. And we need clear, consistent messages. So we don't need scaremongering. We need to inform people about latest approaches in research, technology and science and what that means for consumers and their food choices as well. But here are just some of the challenges with no one solution. And as we sort of look through this list, it's interesting that sort of the new technologies things is coming in where we may need to look at this GM or market assisted selection, which is interesting. It's not GM, but it is sort of a, I would say, similar process. Locally grown foods is an interesting one, or seasonal foods, because if you go on the DEFRA website, seasonal food is seasonal where within the country and where it's grown. So it might be seasonal because it's okay to grow strawberries in December somewhere else on the planet, and therefore it's seasonal because it's in season in that country. And it's the trade-off as well with local, because you might have a local food that's grown out of season in a greenhouse, which is then being heated, and therefore the trade-off with emissions, it's probably better to get them from abroad and bring them in, because that's the way that the energy works. So it's just so complicated of a system. It's trying to work out what the simple messages are. And for us at the BNF, it's about making sure that people eat well, and eat in a good, healthy balance of foods as well. So overall, we think at BNF that nutrition is key to this. We think that's needs to be the ultimate thing. We understand that there's going to have to be some increases or decreases on different types of foods in the future, but we need to make sure that nutrition plays a vital role to make sure that we're actually giving people the optimum amount. In the case, though, that we know that we're not actually already achieving the Eat Well plate. So we've got a lot of work to do. I've already mentioned quite a lot about these relationships and trade-offs as well. Challenges and opportunities, that's always the thing that we're talking about for the farmers, for the food industry, for scientists and so forth as well. That's going to be huge. And then I think, personally, it's teachers in school having a huge role on supporting further food education as well. Just a couple of resources as well. So there's lots of sort of information and stats for you to go back and get your teeth into, particularly if you're doing GCSE and A-level specs. There's lots of reports there that would really help your different specifications. On our Food A Fact of Life website, we've got a new suite of resources which some of you may have already seen. This is particularly looking at dairy industry and also looking at sort of the environment and sustainability. We've also got video clips on there as well of interviewing people and what they do on a farm, so it could be for careers and lots of other aspects as well. So that's a nice one that's on there. And then with Nicola and Chris, we're also producing a resource called Meeting a Green World as well. And I think this will be a nice thing because it's an interactive PowerPoint. So rather than a linear PowerPoint that goes one after another, it sort of takes you around and then there are multiple choice questions. So you could use it on an interactive whiteboard like I'm doing now, or the student can use it by themselves, and that's more appropriate to sort of upper GCSE A-level students. So I think there's a couple of useful resources. That's the last slide. Thanks.